Immense amount of courage.
Well, royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams has told us the news is shocking for many people as Her Majesty's played such an important role. Well, we do interrupt this bulletin as in the last few minutes we have had confirmation that Her Majesty the Queen has died at the age of 96. And we will be taking you back to the Talk Radio studio now to Vanessa Feltz.
It is 6:32. The day is the 8th of September 2022. And I'm extremely sorry to have to bring you the exceptionally sad news that Her Majesty the Queen has died. The news has been confirmed by Buckingham Palace. Her Majesty was 96 years old and had reigned for 70 years. News of her passing is reaching the rest of the world, and she was monarch of more than 100 million people. Her reign began on the 6th of February 1952 when she was just 25.
Well, good evening. I'm Piers Morgan at TalkTv in London. In the last few moments, Buckingham Palace have released a statement, and it reads as follows. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Once again, the statement from Buckingham Palace reads, the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Well, this is one of the saddest and most momentous turning points in the history of the United Kingdom. There's nobody in this country or the world who hasn't lived the majority of their lives under the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. For 70 years she served this country with astoundingly dedicated duty. I struggle to even imagine a Britain without this Queen. But with great sadness, we now have to imagine it because the moment we've all been dreading has finally come. And tonight, everything changes. Her death is an enormous blow, not just to the British people, but to our national psyche. To people around the world who don't fully understand our deep affinity with this Queen, it's as simple as this. Our monarchy and Her Majesty are the very essence of being British. As Abraham Lincoln, apple pie and the Constitution are to being American, so the royal family is to Great Britain. More than an institution, it's an identity, it's who we are. It's the Magna Carta, the Palace of Westminster, the Battle of Waterloo. It's Austen, Dickens, Shakespeare, the Beatles. It's crushing the Nazis. It's Churchill and the Blitz spirit. It's Royal Ascot and the Chelsea Flower Show, cricket at Lord's, Wimbledon tennis, football at Wembley. Nothing and nobody has symbolised what it means to be British better than Queen Elizabeth. She's always been there. She had an aura of invincibility that sadly today has been shattered. And now we have to learn as a country to live without her. Whatever your views of the royal family, wherever you live in the world, you will remember this day because it's history unfolding before our eyes. This remarkable little lady was not just our longest serving monarch, she was the second longest reigning monarch in all of history. Only France's King Louis XI, who gained his title at the age of just 4, eclipses her. She appointed 15 British Prime Ministers. She hosted 13 of the last 14 American presidents. She was our queen for 30% of America's entire history. Think about that. She held more than 100 state visits for the world's leaders. She was the head of state herself in 17 countries. She was the head of the Commonwealth of Nations. And she guided us all through the best of times and the worst of times, through wars, terrorism, pandemics, natural disasters, financial crises. Whatever it was, she was there with dignity, duty, stoicism, and that famous stiff upper lip. Her last act this week was to appoint our new Prime Minister. Remarkably, staggeringly, she was dutiful until the very, very end. I'm so very glad and so very grateful that we all have had the chance to say thank you at her Platinum Jubilee celebrations this summer. And she was able to see just how much she meant to us. Elizabeth II demonstrated the very best of our British values in her leadership. She represented those values to the world. She was our greatest export, our greatest leader, the greatest of Britons. When Her Majesty the Queen died this afternoon in Balmoral, a little piece of all of us here in Britain died with her. Let's take a look back now at this remarkable woman's remarkable life with TalkTV's Zora Suleiman.
Born on April the 21st, 1926, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was the first child of the then Duke and Duchess of York. As King Edward's 8th niece, she wasn't destined to rule, but at the age of 10, her uncle abdicated, and the course of her life changed forever as she suddenly became heir to the throne.
We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen. And we are trying too to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war.
It was the start of the Second World War when a teenage Princess Elizabeth began public duties. She joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, which trained her to drive and repair trucks.
By her example, perhaps more than her service, she served her country.
And like thousands of others, she had a sweetheart in the forces. Her third cousin, young naval officer Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten. Shortly after her 21st birthday in 1947, they married at Westminster Abbey.
Elizabeth and Philip waved their thanks to the happy cheers from below.
The following year, she had a son, Prince Charles, and 2 years later, a daughter, Princess Anne. Then, in 1952, while the royal couple were on tour in Kenya, the news came through that Elizabeth's beloved father, King George VI, had died. And at 25, she had become queen.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service.
Her coronation took place a year later, in 1953. In the 10 years after being crowned, her popularity grew, along with the royal family. First the arrival of Prince Andrew, and then Prince Edward. As a committed head of the Commonwealth, the Queen has visited every nation, often repeatedly. In the 60s, she flew to a remarkable 28 countries in total. The 70s and the 80s were a mix of triumph and turmoil.
A day of tragic violence in Ireland. Lord Mountbatten of Burma has been killed by an explosion on his yacht off the Republic's coast.
Then, in the 1990s, the Queen entered perhaps the most difficult decade of her reign, divorce and devastation.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
But there was worse to come with the death of Princess Diana in 1997. The Queen made an unprecedented live broadcast.
As your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart, first, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being.
5 years later, in 2002, the Queen faced more